Story 1. Déjà Vu. The monotony of the night shift at the gas station was my little slice of peace, a place where the most excitement I expected was the occasional drifter passing through, or the rumble of a late-night trucker. There's one night, though, that I'll never forget. A shift that started just like any other, but ended up being anything but ordinary. It was a typical night. The air was stagnant, and the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights above. I was killing time flipping through a car magazine when, at the stroke of midnight, the bell above the door announced a customer. He was an average-looking guy, but dressed strangely in a thick, heavy coat that seemed out of place for a night that called for a light jacket at best. His eyes darted around the store before settling on me, and he approached the counter with a hesitant step. "Can you tell me how to get to Smithville?" he asked. You'd think in this day and age that any phone could easily pull up any location and give you turn-by-turn directions anywhere. But not wanting to engage in too much conversation with the guy, I elected not to say anything about it, and figured it'd just be easier to give him the directions and send him about his way. "Sure," I said, laying down the magazine. "You're going to take a left out of the parking lot. Follow the road for about 15 miles, then you'll see the sign. Can't miss it." He nodded, thanked me, and turned to leave, but not before I heard him muttering under his breath. It was too low for me to catch the words, and I was left with a small amount of unease. But hey, people are odd, and working nights you see a fair share of odd. An hour passed, uneventfully, and the digital clock on the wall read 1 a.m. That's when the bell chimed again, and if I hadn't known better, I'd have sworn I was experiencing déjà vu. The same guy, same coat, same uncertain gait. He came up to the counter with no sign of recognition, and asked, "Can you tell me how to get to Smithville?" "You just asked me that," I said, my confusion edging into my voice. "An hour ago? Don't you remember?" He blinked, a perfect picture of bewilderment. "Come again?" he said. "Weren't you in here an hour ago asking me the same question?" I said. "I think I'd remember if I had been here before," he replied. I was confused, but like before, I wasn't up for conversation, so I provided the directions again. He took the directions once again, this time with a nod and that same indecipherable mutter. By the time 2 a.m. rolled around, I was feeling the kind of creeped out that you can't shake, that gets under your skin. Sure enough, like a clock striking the hour, he was back. The same question, the same coat, the same everything. I confronted him, saying, "Look, man, this isn't funny. You've been here twice asking for the same thing." The guy fixed me with a stare, a blend of confusion and something else, something darker. "Buddy, this is the first time I've ever seen you," he said, but the sincerity in his voice was as thin as tissue paper. He left once again, but this time I was locked in, focusing hard on what the man had been muttering under his breath the last few times he left. As he left with a repeat of his now familiar muttering, a cold dread settled in my stomach. "See you soon," I heard him whisper. This was no longer just strange, it was alarming. 3 a.m. couldn't come fast enough, and with it, a resolution formed sharp and clear in my mind. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for whatever this was to escalate. I locked the door, a flimsy barrier between me and whatever was out there, but it was something. An hour later, right on cue, he came back, but this time the locked door stopped him. "Hey man, unlock the door," he said. "I need to get some directions." "Hell no," I replied back. The transformation was immediate. The average Joe with the too heavy coat became a maniac. He started pounding on the door, cursing at me with an expression of rage and desperation. "I need to know how to get to Smithville," he screamed, his voice unhinged. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs, and told him, "I can't help you, man." He continued to shout and bang on the door, his face a mask of fury, his eyes wild. That's when I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline as I explained the situation. The police arrived within minutes, but the man had vanished into the night as if he had never been there. They took my statement, their brows creased in concern, or maybe skepticism, and suggested drugs or mental illness might be at play, but nothing about this felt that simple. When the sun came up and the morning crew arrived, I was still there, a complete wreck from the events of the night. They found me rattled, recounting the night's events as if saying them out loud would make sense of it all. But it didn't. Nothing about that night or the multiple encounters with the man made any sense. I requested to not work any more night shifts alone in that gas station anymore. At first, management was accommodating, but as time went on, the request became more and more difficult to fulfill. Ultimately, I ended up having to find a new job. That night has stayed with me. Who in the hell was that man? Was he just trying to freak me out? What was his true intentions? Something tells me the man never made it to Smithville. Something tells me he never had any intentions of ever going there in the first place. Story 2. The Manager's Warnings. I remember it clearly. The day I walked into that job interview for the night security guard position at a local department store. It was supposed to be a straightforward job, something to fill the nights and pad the wallet. The store was an old structure, with walls that held decades of commerce. The manager, an old man with eyes full of years of experience, seemed almost reluctant to hire me. As we sat across from each other in the break room, the smell of stale coffee hanging in the air, he laid it out straight. "We've had a few incidents," he said, his voice lowering as if the very walls around us could hear. "Movement, shadows, things that fall off shelves with no explanation, and sounds, strange sounds that don't belong. Nobody has ever been hurt, but for some, it's a little bit too much to handle." I raised an eyebrow. "So the place is haunted, huh?" I asked, chuckling a little bit. He didn't smile. Instead, he offered a nod. "Believe what you will, but I feel like it's my duty to tell you beforehand. I wasn't a believer in such things. I'd outgrown the fear of the dark. I didn't believe that monsters, ghosts, and goblins were hiding in the shadows. So I accepted the job, my chuckle masking the tiny flicker of doubt that maybe, just maybe, I was stepping into something I couldn't control. The first night arrived, and with it, a sense of nervousness I hadn't expected. The store was different at night, devoid of the comforting hustle of daytime activity. It was just me, my heavy boots echoing on the linoleum floors, the hum of the fluorescent lights above, and the silent atmosphere of 1,000 unsold goods watching me. I took my post at the security desk, a tiny island in a sea of shadows. Monitors flickered with the black and white ghosts of empty aisles and mannequins dressed in the latest fashions. It was on these screens that I first saw it. A flicker of movement that had no source. A flutter that could have been a trick of the light, but felt like so much more. I tried to ignore it, to immerse myself in the routine checks of the cameras, the sip of lukewarm coffee, the flip through a worn magazine. But it felt like the store was watching me with eyes that seemed to come from the very bones of the building. It was when I heard a clatter, a sound like metal on tile, that my resolve began to crumble. I found myself drawn into the heart of the store, my flashlight cutting a swathe through the darkness. The aisles were vast, the shelves towering above me like silent lookouts. There, in the middle of the floor, lay a toy, a small metal car. It was completely out of place, just laying there, like it had been placed there. I told myself it was nothing, just something that had fallen off the shelf. No big deal. I bent down to pick it up. As I placed it back onto the shelf, a cold tingle ran over my skin. I tried to laugh it off, chiding myself for letting the manager's earlier warning get into my head. Settling back into my post, all was quiet for a short time. But then, out of nowhere, the lights began to flicker. I could feel it. I was alone, but not alone. It felt like someone, or something, was studying me. I felt like I needed reassurance, a way to prove to myself that it was all in my head. So, I returned to the floor of the department store, seeking out something that would provide me with the reassurance that I needed. That's when I saw the balloons, a cluster of them tied to an end cap, bobbing gently in the air, that I was now acutely aware had no current. With bravado I didn't feel, I issued my challenge to the empty store. If there's something here, some spirit or ghost, then pop one of those balloons. I waited, my heart pounding in a frantic rhythm. I stared at the balloons, listening, waiting. After a moment, I felt like the reassurance I was seeking had arrived. There was nothing, only silence. Wiping a thin layer of sweat off of my forehead, I gave myself a chuckle and started walking back towards my post. Before I could pivot, though, there was a sudden explosion from one of the balloons. It was as sudden as a lightning strike. The sound of the burst was deafening in the quiet, like a cannon blast that reverberated through the aisles and off the shelves. In that instant, my courage shattered. I didn't hesitate, didn't stop for anything. I left my post, the store, the job, all behind in a heart-pounding sprint for the door. I didn't even bother to lock it behind me. I never went back, not even to explain. But I don't think any explanation was needed. It's a situation I feel that the manager of the store has encountered before. It wasn't his first, and I certainly don't think that it'll be his last. For a few nights after that incident, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, that single loud pop still echoing in my ears. I tell myself it was just a balloon, that it was the pressure or a defect that made it burst. But in the dark of the night, when the world is silent and still, I wonder if I had been too quick to dismiss the manager's warnings. Story 3. Worked too hard. Let me tell you about this one night that I won't be forgetting anytime soon. It was a night like any other, or so I thought, when I clocked in for my cleaning shift at the downtown offices. The building was as quiet as a tomb, just the way it always was at night. I started from the top and worked my way down, floor by floor, with nothing but the hum of the air conditioning for company. By the time I hit the 4th floor, it was around 1 a.m. I unlocked the door and pushed my cart through, expecting the usual silence, but instead, I was greeted by this soft, yet creepy moaning sound. It was faint, coming from the far corner of the floor. My heart started pounding right away. "Hello?" I called out, hoping to get a friendly response back, but there was no answer. I thought maybe I was just tired hearing things. But then there it was again, a moan, clearer this time. Now I'm not one to scare easy, but something about that sound made my hair stand straight up. I stood there for a good minute, trying to decide if I really wanted to know what was making that noise. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check it out. Slowly moving past the cubicles, the moaning got louder and louder. As I crept towards the back of the office, I saw something that absolutely terrified me. I could make out a shadowy figure swaying in the back corner. "Hey, you okay?" I called out, but all I got back was another moan. At this point, this became too much for me, and every instinct told me to turn tail and get out of there. I turned and began to make my way out, but just as I did, I heard a thud, like someone had just dropped a load of books, and the moaning got louder. I froze for a second, then turned around expecting, I don't know what. But the figure was gone. I could still hear soft moans and murmurs, though. I don't know what possessed me, but I decided I had to know what was going on. Maybe it was concern. Maybe it was the fear of not knowing. Any rational person would have left and called security by now, but there I was, creeping closer to where I'd seen the figure. As I neared the back of the office, what I saw was unexpected to say the least. There, in the dim light from the exit sign, I saw feet. I was confused, terrified, panicked, and worried all at the same time. Was this a trap to lure me in closer, or was there someone there that truly needed help? I swallowed hard and moved closer. Finally, I could see that it was a man, all dressed up in a suit, lying there on the floor. I recognized him. He was one of those high flyers from the legal department, always glued to his phone. But there he was, flat out on the carpet, looking nothing like the sharp guy who barely gave me a nod when I passed him in the hallway. He was pale, sweating like he'd run a marathon. I called security right away, and they came running. They called an ambulance, and he was taken away to the hospital. I later learned that the man had been under a lot of stress, popping pills for anxiety. He'd been trying to catch up on work, meet some impossible deadline, and had taken one too many of a cocktail of drugs. That night, I saw firsthand what a job and what stress can do to a person. I finished cleaning the floor in silence, thinking about the man and the pressure he must have been under. It was the scariest thing I've ever encountered, the sounds in the corner of the office, the shadowy figure swaying back and forth. It was a lot for my system to try to process, working alone in the dead of the night, As I locked up the building before dawn, I couldn't help but think about how thin the line is we all walk between keeping it together and falling apart. For the man, I guess sometimes the scariest things in life aren't shadows and moans, but battles that come from inside.